Tales to Terrify.
Welcome to Tales to Terrify, part of the District of Wonders network, featuring Starship Sofa, Crime City Central, and Protecting Project Pulp. Everyone has a story in the District of Wonders. Come and find yours.
Good evening, children of the night, and welcome back to the Nook. This evening, confusingly enough, will be your 107th, 108th, and 109th visit to this neighborhood in the District of Wonders, and I want to thank you for foregoing what, until 2 weeks ago, had been your more than 2 years of consecutive weekly slogs through the dark, sometimes frigid, sometimes steamy, now and then fetid and frequently empty, and during baseball season often drunk-teeming streets that bring you to the Nook's doorbell, Lawrence Santoro's doorbell, that being me. Come in. I am told that Chicago is experiencing temperatures in excess of 25 degrees lower than the norm for this time of year. Well, there is more and cleaner snow on the ground tonight. There are probably fewer rats and coyotes to contend with at present, so doff your wraps, scoop some treats, pour a warm beverage, and snuggle. We have not a long one, but an excellent and varied evening ahead of us. New art. Finally, we have new art. Have a look. The work is called Cold Comfort, and it is that of one Jason Wren. Jason Wren is an Alabama-born illustrator who grew up with what he calls an obsession with comic books, horror, pulp fiction, and with a dream to illustrate the type of stories that thrilled him as a kid, and which, not surprisingly, still do thrill him. Jason graduated with a degree in fine arts from the University of Montevallo in Alabama, and I hope I'm pronouncing that properly, Jason, following which he pursued a career as a portrait artist and teacher. Several years ago, though, he says, he and his little family decided to move to his wife's home country of Finland. In addition, they decided to take a chance on letting him pursue his deep desire to be an illustrator. So, there the Wrens remain with their 3 children, surrounded by a frozen, Lovecraftian landscape in a Tolkien-esque language, which he finds to be the perfect atmosphere to inspire the weird and wonderful in his work. To see Jason's Cold Comfort, go to our homepage at talestoterrify.com. More of Jason Wren's illustrations and design work can be seen on his website, which is on the Tales to Terrify home and Facebook pages. So, thank you, Jason, for tapping on our door to offer us cold comfort. Back this week is Mr. Mike Allen, who will lead us on new, slick and slippery paths through the slaughterhouse of his mind. This week we have a musical voyage among the carcasses. Mike?
Greetings, Tales to Terrify listeners, and welcome to the first tour of the Abattoir of the year 2014. I'm Mike Allen, and this time around I'm going to address a topic heretofore left untouched in these gleefully grim podcasts, the horror to be found in music. I want to give a shout out here to my buddy Dominique Parisien, who suggested that I do this sort of a column a long time ago, and with whom I've occasionally chatted about this topic. See, Dominique and I are both metalheads, and I think that it's just about incontrovertible that heavy metal offers the only true soundtrack to modern horror. Certainly, it's a musical genre that's embraced horror to the hilt. If you remember my novel, The Blackfire Concerto, Larry graciously included the first part of it, The Red Empress, in a previous Tales to Terrify podcast. Well, I've been working on a sequel with the working title The Ghoulmaker's Aria. Now, what does that have to do with horror music? Over the Christmas holiday, I put my nose to the grindstone and wrote a large chunk of this sequel, and I did it to a soundtrack, a method that I often find useful. So this sequel has been composed to the entirety of the early catalog of Black Sabbath, as well as a select handful of their more recent albums. In the late 1960s, the members of Black Sabbath mutually decided to present themselves as a horror band, inspired by the popularity of horror films. What they came up with involved down-tuned guitars, slow, ominous guitar riffs, and lyrics infused with mystical hocus-pocus and references to Satan's influence. They're frequently credited for inventing the entire heavy metal sound, or at least with popularizing it. Their first three albums especially epitomized this approach and cemented their reputation as a scary band for all time. In 2014, this is serious golden oldie stuff, which is funny for me to think about as I discovered them in the 1980s when they really weren't all that old yet, though I suppose they were old by the standards of utterly fickle pop music fans whom nobody should ever trust for guidance anyway in terms of what's good and what's not. I want to point out, too, that in this day and age, when just about every album ever recorded has been uploaded to YouTube, there's no excuse for you not to check any of these things out if something I mentioned here strikes your fancy. Now then, Black Sabbath's very first song, called Black Sabbath, on their very first album, also called Black Sabbath, is a prime example of what they thought of as horror music, with its lyrics of fleeing from a figure in black and Satan coming around the bend and this ominous tritone riff that this is all sung over. Even better is the mysterious NIB, which the band claims is not an acronym for Nativity in Black. That song involves a spooky recounting of entrapment by the love of Lucifer. I especially enjoy these lyrics. Now I have you with me under my power. My love grows stronger now with every hour. Look into my eyes, you'll see who I am. My name is Lucifer. Please take my hand. How I love that song. There's something about guitarist Tony Iommi's drawn-out deep distortion, Geezer Butler's rumbling bass, and Ozzy Osbourne's untrained, painfully stretched-out vocals that just clicks together in a nasty way on the album as a whole and on this song in particular. Black Sabbath's instincts that they were going to tap into something popular was borne out by their album's sales. Their next two albums, Paranoid and Master of Reality, continued the heavy horror themes with songs like War Pigs, Iron Man, Hand of Doom, Lord of This World, Into the Void, and Children of the Grave. It's fascinating to think that those three albums, absolutely essential to what heavy metal became and what it is today, were cranked out very quickly in 1970 and 1971 over a period of just 18 months, often with just a couple days in the studio to create the actual recordings. Their next three albums, Volume 4, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, and Sabotage, moved away from these overt attempts to be scary and more toward prog rock and celebrations of drugs and drugged-out excess, though they still stayed closer to the boundaries of horror than you would find in contemporary bands like Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, or Alice Cooper. Alice Cooper's horror was much more of a factor in his over-the-top and cheesy stage show than in his actual songs. Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, despite its ominous title and artwork depicting a man being torn apart by demons on a bed with 666 emblazoned on the bed frame, has some bizarre passages, like Ozzy suggesting that God is evil as he sings from the chains of hell in this plodding synthesizer composition called Who Are You? However, I think Sabotage has the edge in this regard. Sabotage may have the dumbest looking cover in Sabbath history, and if you don't believe me, look it up. But musically, in my opinion, it's their masterpiece, with a ton of weird, epic, heavy, surprisingly arranged songs all in a row. Hole in the Sky, Symptom of the Universe, Megalomania, Superzar, The Writ. I specifically highlight the surprising arrangements because there's a playful side to this album in how songs will suddenly veer into random things like piano playing and jug blowing, and yet it all fits together. You have to hear it to believe it, but trust me. By then, the band had been lost in a drug and alcohol-fueled haze for years, and the next two albums show it. Technical Ecstasy and Never Say Die sound like Black Sabbath trying to be just a plain old rock and roll band like AC/DC or any number of far less distinguished hard rockers. Though they're more interesting than their reputation might lead you to believe, especially in the case of Never Say Die, they're still just goofy shadows of what came before. Ozzy was kicked out of the band after Never Say Die was released, and despite his life being a complete mess at this point due to his own addictions, he returned to his horror roots in his solo career at the beginning of the 1980s to huge success with songs like Mr. Crowley, Diary of a Madman, and Bark at the Moon, the video of which involved him dressing up in a Lon Chaney werewolf suit. But that's a whole digression that I don't want to explore too deeply for the purposes of this particular column. It's very interesting what Black Sabbath does next. After losing Ozzy, they hire Ronnie James Dio to fill his shoes. He sounds nothing like Ozzy, though as a singer, he's more talented by light years. Sorry, Ozzy fans. He comes to them from Rainbow, which is a band centered around Ritchie Blackmore, the temperamental and apparently very difficult to get along with guitarist who first became famous in Deep Purple. It's fascinating how these British heavy metal bands swap members. You'll hear a little bit more about this in a bit. Like Geezer Butler, who is Black Sabbath's main lyricist, not Ozzy, Dio is all about the mystical black magical mumbo jumbo, so in that way he fits right in. Their first album together, Heaven and Hell, goes back to that dark fantasy feel from Sabbath's earliest work, though the arrangements are more complex. It doesn't sound very much like Master of Reality. Heaven and Hell doesn't quite get back to full-blown horror, though, but the next album with Dio, Mob Rules, I would argue, does. It's no coincidence that the animated movie Heavy Metal used the album's title track, The Mob Rules, as the soundtrack for its most violent scene. I should mention also that the studio version of the song Heaven and Hell has some eerie overtones, but the live version, found on their first official live album, called Live Evil, explicitly grounds the song in horror, when Dio adds a couple of blatantly satanic verses that aren't found in the studio recording. Black Sabbath had a good thing going with Dio, but he could also be one that was a little touchy to get along with, and he had left the band after an argument that took place prior to Live Evil even appearing in stores. And so the follow-up album to Live Evil ends up being Born Again, with lead singer Ian Gillan, formerly of Deep Purple. Now this is a pretty strange choice for a Black Sabbath singer, if you look at it from the outside. I personally love Smoke on the Water and Mark II Deep Purple in general, but they're about as scary as a litter full of puppies. Yet, I think Gillan did a credible job of adapting to the Black Sabbath style. There are two songs on Born Again, Disturbing the Priest and Zero the Hero, that belong in any list of the best hardcore creepy songs that Sabbath ever came out with. Especially Zero the Hero, with its instrumental opening that sounds like monsters growling. That's always going to be a favorite of mine. Cannibal Corpse liked the song well enough to release a cover version of their own, and certainly you wouldn't want to argue with Cannibal Corpse. I'm going to skip ahead now and address three more albums. Black Sabbath came apart almost completely after 1983, once Gillan left, They most frequently, in the years that followed, made use of a singer named Tony Martin, who had the voice range to handle what came before from the likes of Gillan and Dio, but wasn't, in my opinion, a particularly inspiring singer on his own turf. So I'm rolling forward to when the reunions begin. First with Dio in 1991, when Sabbath came out with the album Dehumanizer, which is not a knockout effort, but has some solidly horror-centric songs, mostly dealing with technology run amok. You have to wait almost 20 more years, though, to get another album that really delivers the goods. And this is once again a reunion with Dio. It wasn't released as an official part of the Black Sabbath catalog. At this point, Sabbath had technically reunited with Ozzy, and so, when they were fooling around on the side with Dio again, they chose to call themselves Heaven and Hell, though most everyone paying attention knew that it was really Black Sabbath. The record they released, called The Devil You Know, is a doozy. Incredible doom metal. If you're at all familiar with the terms the kids use these days, this is a horror album through and through, with Dio singing about Satan, serial killers, torture, black magic, and other dark topics that are so dear to our hearts. I played it over and over and over again as I worked on my dark fantasy sequel, and it was perfect. No individual song is better than the highlights of the first Dio albums, such as Children of the Sea, Sign of the Southern Cross, or Voodoo, but the album as a whole is more consistent in quality and much heavier than either Mob Rules or Heaven and Hell. And that's what matters, right? Alas, Dio is gone now, but his final album was definitely something that I hope he was proud of, because he deserved to be proud of, because it's goddamn awesome. Last but not least, the quote official unquote Black Sabbath lineup with Ozzy last year released their first studio album together since 1978, called 13, and it debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200, which I think goes to show how those earliest Sabbath albums, like Paranoid and Master of Reality, have just continued to gain a following through the years and earn more and more respect for that particular lineup of the band. If you haven't gathered this by now, I'm personally a bit more of a Dio fan than I am an Ozzy fan. So for me, The Devil You Know edges 13 out as a listening experience. However, the songs on 13 very much line up in style and tone with the songs on The Devil You Know, with slow, heavy, doom-laden riffs. You could almost combine them into a double album, and it would work. Or even better, select the best songs from each and combine them into one complete record. Butler is the lyricist for most of 13, again, not Ozzy. So once again, we hear Ozzy singing about quasi-black magical mumble-jumbo, which his strange voice remains curiously well suited for. The songs have more to do with existential angst than Dio's more overt tales of murder and sadism, which again, to my mind, gives points to Devil You Know, but it still sets a wonderfully gloomy, downturned mood. I'm going to end this digression of a column with a final digression in a different yet related direction. Black Sabbath, of course, like many heavy metal bands, has been accused of being satanic just about from the start of their existence. But with the wonderful exception of NIB, their songs that are actively diabolical are really all about Satan punishing the wicked, not the actual worship of Satan. There is heavy metal out there that goes there, much of it not very memorable musically. However, in my deep-cutting quest to find the right music for this new novel of mine, I stumbled on a relatively new band from Sweden called Ghost BC in America for legal reasons. They're clearly a direct descendant of the hard rock and heavy metal bands of the 1970s. They model themselves quite deliberately after Black Sabbath and Deep Purple and do a wonderful job of it. Musically, they're really strong in their playing, in their singing, and lyrically, they're all about devil worship. And they're queasily peppy and cheerful about it, which makes for a refreshing and wonderfully disturbing change. I've been tripping out on their most recent album, Infestissumam, which might give the closest approximation to an alternate history in which Geezer Butler wrote the lyrics for Deep Purple. Their songs genuinely sound like summoning spells, which is freaking my wife out a bit. Which perhaps extends their appeal that much more. Again, if I am making you curious, this entire album, in fact just about every album that I've discussed, can be heard just an internet click away. So go indulge your dark side. I think you'll be glad you did. And until next time, stay scared.
Well, thank you, Mike. You know, I am sore tempted to disagree utterly with Mike. And then I realized that all I know of heavy metal is, well, nothing, in fact. I tried to listen to some of it in the wake of previewing Mike's offering for this weekend. Apopologies, my droogs, but I really could not get through a single cut without chuckling. You see, I have watched This Is Spinal Tap many times, and I kept hearing their music in what was coming from Black Sabbath. What I can absolutely disagree with Mike about, however, is his comment that it is just about incontrovertible that heavy metal offers the only soundtrack to modern horror. It, and those who produce metal, may embrace modern horror, but I utterly disagree with the corollary that modern horror embraces it. At least I hope not. I write modern horror, and I, too, write to a soundtrack. I write to a vasty span of musical history as I work, going from the Middle Ages all the way up to L.A. rap. So metal, to me, you see, seems encapsulated by one Spinal Tap moment in particular. It's during a commercial for one of the band's albums. A voice of doom announcer tells us that the album will smash your skull, liquefy your brain, and destroy your soul, or something like that. Immediately after which, Christopher Guest's Nigel Tufnell tells us, and it makes a great gift, too. I cannot listen to metal without hearing just that juxtaposition. Fiction. Tonight's tale to Terrify is by Scott Nicholson. Scott's authorial specialties are horror and thrillers that are often set in rural Appalachia. Scott is the author of 7 novels, including The Red Church, a finalist for the Bram Stoker Award in 2002, Speed Dating with the Dead, Drummer Boy, and The Skull Ring. Other books include the novellas Burial to Follow and Transparent Lovers, and the story collections Ashes, The First, and Flowers. In 1999, his story Vampire Shortstop won the Writers of the Future L. Ron Hubbard Gold Award. In addition, Scott also writes screenplays and children's books. He lives in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. Here is Scott Nicholson's You'll Never Walk Alone.
Daddy said them that eat human flesh will suffer under hell. I ain't figured that out yet, how there can be a place under hell. Daddy couldn't hardly describe it hisself. It's just a real bad place. Hotter than the regular hell and probably lonelier too. Since hell's about full up and nobody's a stranger. Been so much sinning the devil had to build a basement for the gray people. It was Saturday when we heard about them. I was watching cartoons and eating a bowl of cornflakes. I like cereal with lots of sugar, so when the flakes are done, you can drink down that thick milk at the bottom of the bowl. It come up like a commercial. Some square-headed man in a suit sitting at a desk, with that beeping sound like when they tell you a bad storm's coming. Daddy was drinking coffee with his boots off, and he said there wasn't a cloud in the sky, and the wind was lazy as a cut cat. So he figured it was just another thing about the Arabs, and who cared if they blew each other to kingdom come. Except then they showed some of that TV that looks like them cop shows, the camera wiggly so you can't half see what they're trying to show you. Daddy kept the cartoons turned down low because he said the music hurt his ears, but this time he took the remote from beside my cereal bowl and punched it 3 or 4 times with his thumb. The square-headed man was talking faster than they usually do, like a Flatlander, acting like he deserved a pat on the head because he was doing such a good job telling about something bad. Then the TV showed somebody in rags moving toward the camera, and Daddy said, "Lordy!" Looked like something walked out of one of them suicide bombs, because his face was gray and looked like the meat had melted off the bone. But the square-headed man said the picture was live from Winston-Salem. That's about 2 hours from us here in the mountains. The man said it was happening all over. The hospitals were crowded, and the governor done called out the National Guard. Then the television switched, and it was the president standing at a bunch of microphones, saying something about a new terror threat, but how everybody ought to stay calm because you never show fear in the face of the enemy. Daddy said them damned ragheads must have finally let the bugs out of the bottle. I don't see how bugs could tear up a man's skin that way, to where it looked like he'd stuck his head in a lawnmower and then washed his face with battery acid and grease rags. I saw a dead raccoon once, in the ditch when I was walking home from school, and maggots was squirming in its eye holes, and them shiny green dookie flies was swarming around its tail. I reckon that's what kind of bugs Daddy meant. Only worse, because these ones get you while you're still breathing. I was scared then, but it was the kind where you just sort of feel like the ashes in the pan at the bottom of the wood stove, where you don't know what to be afraid of. At least when you hear something moving in the dark woods, your hands get sweaty and your heart jumps a mite faster, and you know which way to run. But looking at the TV, all I could think of was the time I woke up and Mama wasn't making breakfast, and Mama didn't come home from work, and Mama didn't make supper. A kind of scared that fills you up belly first, and you can't figure it out, and you can't take a stick to it like you can that thing in the dark woods. And then there was the next day when Mama still didn't come home, and that's how I felt about the bugs out of the bottle, because it seems like you can't do nothing to stop it. Then I felt bad because the president would probably say I was showing fear in the face of the enemy, and Daddy voted for the president because it was high time for a change. I asked Daddy what we was going to do, and he said the Lord would show the way. Said he was loading the shotgun just in case because the Lord helped those that helped themselves. Said he didn't know whether them things could drive a car or not. If they had to walk all the way from the big city, they probably wouldn't get here for 3 days, if they come here at all. Daddy told me to go put up the cows. So the TV man said they liked living flesh. But you can't trust what the TV says half the time, because they want to sell you something. I didn't figure how they could sell anything by scaring people like that. But I was awful glad we lived a mile up a dirt road, in a little notch in the mountains. It was cold for March. Maybe too cold for them bugs. But I wasn't too happy about fetching the cows, because they tend to wander in the mornings and not come in till dark. Cows like to spend their days all the same. If you do something new, they stomp and stir and start in with the moos, and I was afraid the moos might bring the bugs or them gray people that eat living flesh. I about told Daddy I was too scared to fetch them by myself, but he might have got mad because of what the president said and all. Besides, he was busy putting on his boots. So I took my hickory stick from by the door and called Shep. He was probably digging for groundhogs up by the creek and couldn't hear me. I walked out to the fields on the north side where the grass grows slow and we don't put cows except early spring. Some of the trees were starting to get new leaves, but the woods was mostly brown rot and granite stone. That made me feel a little better, because a bug-bit gray person would have a harder time sneaking up on me. We was down to only 4 cows because of the long drought, and we had to cull some steers last year, or else buy hay. 4 is easy to round up, because all you got to do is get one of them moving, and the rest will follow. Cows in a herd almost always point their heads in the same direction, like they all know they're bound for the same place sooner or later. Most people think cows are dumb, but some things they got a lot of sense about. You hardly ever see a cow in a hurry. I figure they don't worry much. And they probably don't know about being scared, except when you take them to the barn in the middle of the day. Then maybe they remember the blood on the walls, and the steaming guts, and the smell of raw meat, and the jingle of the slaughter chains. By the time I got them penned up, Shep had come in from wherever, and gave out a bark like he'd been helping the whole time. I took him into the house with me. I don't ever do that unless it's come a big snow or when icicles hang from his fur. Daddy was dressed and the shotgun was laying on the kitchen table. I gave Shep the last of my cereal milk. Daddy said the TV said the gray people was walking all over, even in the little towns, but said some of the telephone wires was down so nobody could tell much what was going on where. I asked Daddy if these was like the end times of the Bible, like what preacher Danny Lee Aldridge talked about when the sermon was almost over and the time had come to pass the plate. I always got scared about the end times, even sitting in the church with all the wood and candles and that soft red cloth on the back of the pews. The end times was the same as hell to me, but preacher Aldridge always wrapped up by saying that the way out of hell was to walk through the house of the Lord, climb them stairs, and let the loving light burn every little shred of sin out of you. All you had to do was ask, but you had to do it alone. Nobody else could do it for you. So you got to pray to the Lord. I like to pray in church where there's lots of people, and the Lord has to mind everybody at the same time. It's probably wrong, but I get scared when I try to pray all by myself. I used to pray with Mama and Daddy, then just Daddy. And that's okay because I figured Daddy's louder than me and probably has more to talk about. I just get that sharp rock feeling in my belly every time I think about the Lord looking at nobody but me when I ain't got nothing to hide behind and my stick is out of reach. But these ain't the end times, Daddy said, because the gray people don't have horns, and the TV didn't say nothing about a dragon coming up out of the sea. But he said since they eat human flesh, they're of the devil, and said their bodies may be walking around, but you better believe their souls are roasting under hell, especially if they got bit by the Arab bug. I told him the cattle was put up, and he said the chickens would be okay. You can't catch a chicken even when your legs is working right, much less when you're wobbling around like somebody beat the tar out of you with an axe handle. He said to get in the truck. I made Shep jump in the truck bed. Daddy come out of the house with a loaf of white bread and some cans of sardines. Had the shotgun, too. He got in the truck and started it, and I asked him where we was headed. He said in troubled times, you go get closer to the Lord. I asked him if maybe he thought Mama would be okay. He said it didn't matter none, since the devil done got her ages ago. Said she was already a gray person before this bug mess even started. Said to waste no prayers on her. The dirt road was mushy from winter. The road runs by the creek for a while, then crosses a little bridge by the Hodges place. That's where I always caught the school bus, with Johnny Hodges and his sister Raylene. Smoke was coming out of their chimney, and I asked Daddy if we ought to stop and tell them about what the TV said. Daddy said they might be gray people already. I tried to picture Johnny with his face all slopped around, or Raylene with bugs eating her soft places. Mr. Hodges didn't go to church, and Johnny told me he used to beat them sometimes when he drank too much. I wondered if all the people who didn't go to church had turned gray and started eating human flesh. We passed a few other houses, but didn't see nobody, even at the preacher's place. The church was right there where the gravel turned to paved, set up above the road on a little green hill. The graveyard was tucked away to one side, where barbed wire strung off a pasture. The church was made of brick, the windows up high so that people wouldn't look outside during the preaching. Seeing that white cross jabbed up into the sky made me feel not so scared. We parked the truck around back. Daddy had me carry the food, and he carried the shotgun. Said a Bible and a shotgun was all a man needed. I didn't say nothing about a man needed food. I found a little pack of sugar in the truck's ashtray, and I hid it in my pocket. We didn't have no Coca-Colas. They keep the church unlocked in case people want to come in and pray. Daddy said people in the big city lock their churches. If they don't, people might come in and sleep or steal the candle holders and hymn books. But this is the mountains, where people all know each other and get along, and you don't need to lock everything. So we went inside. Daddy made Shep stay out, said it would be disrespecting to the Lord. We locked the door from the inside. I thought somebody else might want to come get close to the Lord in these troubled times, but Daddy said they could knock if they wanted in. We went up to the front where the pulpit is, and Daddy said we might as well get down and give thanks for deliverance. I didn't feel delivered yet, but Daddy was a lot smarter about the Bible. So I went on my knees and kept my eyes closed while Daddy said, "Oh Lord, it's looking mighty dark, but the clouds will part, and heaven will knock down them gray people and set things right." I joined in on the amen and said I was hungry. Daddy opened up the sardines, and they stank. I spilled some of the fish juice on the floor. We ate some of the bread. It was gummy and stuck to my teeth. I was tired, tried to lay down in the front pew, but it was like sleeping in a rock coffin. I didn't know why people in the big city would want to do such a thing. Daddy started reading from the Bible, but the light got bad as the afternoon wore on. The church ain't got electric power. I asked Daddy how long we was going to stay holed up, and he said as long as it took. I wished we had a TV so we could see what was going on. Night finally come, and I was using the bathroom in back when I heard Shep whimpering. I reckon he was lonely out there. It sounded like he was scratching in the dirt out back of the church. I climbed up on the sink and looked out the little window. Under the moonlight I saw the graveyard, and it looked like somebody had took a shovel to it, tore up the dirt real bad. Somebody was coming up out of one of the holes, and I reckon that's what Shep was whimpering about. I went and told Daddy what I seen, and he said maybe it was the end times after all. Shep started barking, and I begged Daddy to let me open the door. He said the Lord would take care of Shep, but then I heard him bark again, and I was trying to open the door when Daddy knocked me away. Said he'd take a look. Stepped outside with the shotgun, and the gun went off, and Daddy started cussing goddamn right there on the church steps. Shep started moaning, and I ran to the door, and Shep was crawling toward the woods on his belly like his back was broke. I thought Daddy had shot him, and I started to cry, but then I seen somebody coming from the woods. Daddy racked another shell into the chamber and hollered, but the person just kept coming. Daddy told me to go in and lock the door, but I couldn't. I was too scared to be in that big dark church by myself. Daddy shot high and the pellets scattered through the tops of the trees, and still the person kept coming, walking slow with a limp. Another person came out of the trees, then another. They was all headed in the same direction, straight toward the church. One of them bent down and got Shep, and I never heard such a sound from a dog. Daddy was cussing a blue streak, and let loose both barrels, and one of the people stood still for just a second, and I could see that gray face turned up toward the moon, the eye holes empty. Then his insides tumbled out, but he kept on coming for us, and Daddy was pushing me back through the door, and we got inside and locked it. Daddy went up front, and I could hear him crying. Except for that, the church was quiet. I thought the gray people might try to knock the door down, but maybe they got scared away because of it being a church and all. I went up beside Daddy and waited until he was himself again. He said he was sorry for showing fear in the face of the enemy and said, "Oh Lord, give me the strength to do your work." I said, "Lord, protect Mama wherever she is," and Daddy said it was wrong to ask for selfish things. Daddy said the end times was a test for the weak. Said you had to stay strong in the Lord. Said it about 1,500 times in a row, over and over, in a whisper, and it made me scared. I was about asleep when Daddy poked me with the gun. Said, "Come here, son, over by the window where I can see you good." The moon was coming through the window, and I could hear the gray people walking outside. They was going around in circles, all headed in the same direction. Daddy asked me if I got bit by one of them bugs. I said, "Don't reckon." He said, "Well, you're looking a little gray," and I told him I didn't feel nary bit gray. He asked me if I was getting hungry, and I said a little. He gave me the rest of the bread and said to eat it. I took a bite, and he said, "You didn't say thanks to the Lord." Then he thanked the Lord for both of us. I asked Daddy if Shep had gone to heaven. He said it depended on whether he was dead before the gray people ate him. Said Shep might have done turned gray hisself, and might bite me if he saw me again. I almost asked Daddy to say a prayer for Shep, but that sounded like a selfish thing. I must have finally dozed off because I didn't know where I was when I opened my eyes. Daddy was at the front of the church, in the pulpit where Preacher Aldridge stood of a Sunday. The sun was about up, and Daddy had the Bible open and was trying to read in the bad light. Somebody was knocking on the church door. Daddy said the Word was made of flesh and dwelt among us. Daddy stopped, just like Preacher Aldridge did, like he wanted to catch his breath and make you scared at the same time. Then Daddy got louder and said we beheld his glory, as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. I asked what did that mean, and Daddy said the Lord come down among people and nobody saw the signs. Said they treated him just like any normal person, except then he set off doing miracles, and people got scared, and nailed him to the cross. Said it was probably gray people that done it. I asked Daddy if we ought to open the church door and see who was knocking. Daddy said gray people wasn't fit to set foot in the house of the Lord. I asked, what if it's the preacher, or the Hodges kids, or Opalie Rominger from down the road? Daddy said, they're all gray. Everybody. Said they was all headed under hell. Said every sinner is wicked and blind to their sinning ways. I didn't see how Opally Rominger could eat living flesh because she ain't got no teeth. The knocking stopped and I didn't hear no screams, so maybe whoever it was didn't get ate up. I listened to Daddy read the Bible. The sun come up higher, and I wondered about the cows. Did the gray people eat them all? It wasn't like there ain't enough sinners to go around. I didn't for a minute believe that everybody was gray. There had to be others like us. There's a hymn that says, "You'll never walk alone." I don't reckon the Lord breaks promises like that, but I was way too scared to ask. Daddy's eyes were getting bloodshot, like he hadn't slept a wink, and he was whispering to himself again. I drank water from the plate that Preacher Aldridge passed around on Sundays. The water tasted like old pennies. Daddy didn't drink nothing. I asked him if he wanted the last can of sardines, but he said man can't live by bread alone, but by the word of the Lord. I wondered what the Lord's words tasted like. I wondered what people tasted like. I ate the sardines by myself. That night was quiet, like the gray people had gone on to wherever they were headed. I woke up in the morning plenty sore, and I asked Daddy if we could take a peek out of the door. Daddy hadn't moved. Stood up there at the pulpit like he was getting ready to let loose with a sermon. He had the shotgun raised toward heaven, and I don't reckon he heard me. I asked it louder, and he said, "You can't see the gray people because every sinner is blind." I said, "I ain't no sinner," but he said, "You're looking mighty gray to me." I said, "I ain't gray." And then he made me prove it. Said, "Get on your knees and beg the Lord to forgive you." He pointed the shotgun at me. I didn't know if he would use it or not, but the way his eye twitched, I wasn't taking no chances. I got on my knees, but I was scared to close my eyes. When you close your eyes and pray, it's just you and the Lord. You're blind, but the Lord sees everything. I asked Daddy to pray with me. Daddy set into asking the Lord to forgive us our sins and trespasses. I wondered if he was trespassing on the church. It belonged to the Lord, and we was here so we wouldn't get ate up. I didn't say nothing to Daddy about it, though. I added an extra loud amen just so Daddy would know for sure that I wasn't gray. Later I asked Daddy how come every sinner is gray. He said the Lord decides such things. He said Mama was a sinner, and that's why she was gray all along, and her soul was already under hell. I didn't say nothing to that. Sometimes Daddy said I took after my mama. I wished I'd took after Daddy instead and been able to pray all by myself. I said it sounded like the gray people was gone. Daddy said you can't trust the devil's tricks. Said the only way out was through the Lord. I said I was getting hungry again. Daddy said get some sleep and pray. I woke up lost in the dark, and Daddy was screaming his head off. He was sitting where the moon come through the window, and he said, "Look at me, look at my skin." He held up his hands and said, "I'm gray, I'm gray, I'm gray." Said he was unfit to be in the house of the Lord. He put the shotgun barrel up to the side of his neck, and then there was a flash of light, and sounded like the world split in half, and then something wet slapped against the walls. I crawled over to him and laid beside him till all the warm had leaked out. I was scared, and I wanted to pray, but without Daddy to help me, the Lord would look right into me, and that was worse than anything. Then I thought if Daddy was in heaven now, maybe I could say a prayer to him instead, and he could pass along my words to the Lord. The sun come up finally, and Daddy didn't look gray at all. He was white. His belly gurgled, and the blood around his neck hole turned brown. I went to the door and unlocked it. Since it was Sunday morning, I figured people would be coming to hear the sermon. With more people in the church, I could pray without being so scared. I stacked up some of the hymn books and stood on them so I could look out the window. They was back. More gray people were walking by, all headed in the same direction. I figured they were going to that place under hell, just like Daddy said. And it made me happy that Daddy died before he turned gray. Time passed real slow, and the bread was long gone, and nobody come to church. I never figured so many people that I used to pray with would end up turning gray. Like church didn't do them no good at all. I thought of all the prayers I said with them, and it made me scared. The kind of scared that fills you up belly first. I wondered what the Lord thought about all them sinners, and what kind of words the Lord said back to them when they prayed. Daddy's fingers had gone stiff, and I about had to break them to get the shotgun away. He'd used up the last shell. The door was unlocked, but nobody set foot in the church. I was hoping whoever had knocked the other day might come back, but they didn't. The gray people didn't come in the church. I figured if they was eating live flesh, they would get me sooner or later. Except maybe they was afraid about the church and all, or being in plain sight of the Lord. Or maybe they ain't figured out doors yet. I wondered if you go through doors to get under hell. Night come again. Daddy was dead cold. I was real hungry, and I asked Daddy to tell the Lord about it, but I reckon Daddy would call that a selfish thing and wouldn't pass it on. I kept trying to pray, but I was scared. Preacher Aldridge said, "You got to do it alone. Can't nobody do it for you." Maybe one of them Arab bugs got in while the door was open. Maybe the gray people ain't ate me yet because I ain't live flesh no more. Only the Lord knows. All I know is I can't stay in this church another minute. Daddy's starting to stink and the Lord's looking right at me, like I'm already gray. I don't feel like I am, but Daddy said every sinner is blind. And it's the kind of hungry that hurts. Outside the church, the morning is fresh and cold and smells like broken flowers. I hear footsteps in the wet grass. I turn and walk, and I fit right in, like they was saving a place for me. I'm one of them, following the ones ahead and leading the ones behind. We're all headed in the same direction. Maybe this entire world is the place under hell, and we've been here all along. I ain't scared no more, just hungry. The hungry runs deep. You can't live by bread alone. Sometimes you need meat instead of words. I don't have to pray no more. Out here where it ain't never dark, where the Lord don't look at you, where we're all sinners, where you're born gray again and again, and the end times never end, where you never walk alone.
Thank you for the use of this story, Scott. You know, I began life, that is to say life before Tales to Terrify, as one who more or less disavowed most zombie fiction. This largely because I was more or less ignorant of the range and, dare I say, the subtleties and possibilities inherent in this subgenre. Scott and several other authors I've encountered here in the Nook over the last 2 years are beginning to help me see the light. So, thank you for that too, Scott. And thank you, Antoinette Bergin, who read tonight's tale. Antoinette says of herself that she is twisted, dark, sarcastic, and pessimistic, weird, demented, which combination makes any given person absolutely adorable, apparently, herself included. She is the author of Bedtime Stories for Children You Hate. And, Nettie, I still await my package of lime jello, gifts which from time to time she apparently mails to those persons she deems worthy. She can be found on Twitter as @Nettie_Bergin, that's NETTI_BERGIN, and she probably won't harm you if you follow her. And that, no, that will not quite be that tonight. There is one more thing before you wrap for home. Remember, way back then, 2 more shows ago, I suggested that writers record and send us about 10 minutes or so of their novel, story, poem, et al., and that we would cast it forth here in the Nook. Well, here is the most recent submission to this 10 terrifying minutes offer, and I will let the author introduce himself and tell you all about it.
Hi, everyone. My name's Jesse Livingston, and I'm an author living in Denver, Colorado. You may have heard my work on Pseudopod and the Drabblecast. I wrote a novel called 1,000 Lifetimes in an Hour, and then I recorded it as an audiobook with original music composed by my brother and myself. It's a series of interconnected short stories about ghosts, demons, and strange events. It has kind of a Vonnegut, Philip Dick, House of Leaves thing going on. It was reviewed on my favorite horror fiction review podcast, Necronomipod, and they compared it favorably to both Moby Dick and 2.5 Men. No joke. Anyway, you can find the audiobook at 1000lifetimes.com, and when you buy it, you get a free album of the music used in the audiobook. Here's an excerpt from one of the stories called The Orange Light. I had just woken out of a dream I didn't remember well. It had something to do with a bookcase in a tower and an underground room. There were plants growing in the moonlight. I was walking out of my room into the hallway, rubbing at my eyes. My head hurt a little bit, and everything looked slightly orange. I figured it was left over from my dream, since there was a certain feeling I can't describe that went along with the color. If I had to say, I guess it was a feeling of being lost or far away from what you were used to. Like if you climbed a mountain and you were looking down into a valley on the other side. It seemed to be one of those strange things that happen when you just wake up, maybe caused by chemicals shifting around in your head. When I got to the top of the stairs, I looked down. Things looked normal, and the feeling was gone along with my headache. For some reason, I turned and stared back down the hallway. Everything still looked orange in there, and the feeling came back, though not as strong. I went downstairs and then back up again to make sure that what was happening was real. The orange color was hanging in the air all around, as though the regular lights were making it, but they had never made that color before. It was a sickly sweet color of orange, like some part of the air had died. The light was like a light I had seen before during an eclipse, but that light had been purple. The way it filled the world was the same way, though, as if it had always been there, and I had just noticed it. The longer I stood looking at it, the more my head started to hurt again, so I went downstairs. When I got home from work, I checked the second-floor hallway. It was still there, all of it, in the air. I wasn't sure what to do about it, so I decided to ask the name. I opened up the closet in the spare room and found the box labeled The Name, which was in the back under some dusty books. I took it into the study and cut the tape with an antique letter opener. I pulled the name out of the box and put it on the desk. The plug had 20 prongs of different lengths, and it reminded me of a little gold castle. I went to the laundry room and searched around in the utility drawer until I found the adapter. When I finally plugged in the name and switched it on, it didn't seem happy. "Let me out of here," it said. "No," I said. "Tell me what to do about the upstairs hallway. It's filled with orange light." "There is no orange light," it said. "You're imagining things. Let me out of here or else." "You're not being helpful," I said. "Tell me about the orange light or I'll unplug you and put you back in the closet." "I don't care," it said. "This current is not strong enough to be worth drinking anyway." "If I brought you a strong current, would you tell me about the orange light?" It sulked for a minute. Then it said, "Maybe." I went down to the basement and looked around for a few minutes. The basement was large. In fact, I couldn't remember having ever seen all of it. There was a single bulb at the bottom of the stairs, which made a small circle of light on the floor. The light showed the outlines of boxes stacked against pillars, which were spaced a few feet apart. From where I stood, I could see the pillars marching away into the darkness. The only other thing I could see was the furnace, which was like a metal octopus with a glowing red mouth. Pipes came out of it on all sides and disappeared into the ceiling. In the shadow of one of the pipes, I saw something like a huge black sewing machine. I dragged it out into the light and found that it was a generator. It ran on steam, which surprised me. I didn't remember buying it, but there were a lot of things in the house I didn't remember buying. I didn't have any coal to put in the generator, so I had to use wood. When I had hauled it upstairs to the study, I broke apart a chair, which looked old, and used it to light the fire in the generator. When I flipped the switch, the wheels kicked and spun, and the name made a happy noise. "Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday," it sang. "Now tell me about the orange light," I said. The name chattered for a few seconds, then it was quiet. "Tell me now," I said. "There is no orange light," said the name. "I already told you. I wish there was. It might cheer this place up a little. It's so dim in here all the time. Don't you think a house should have windows?" "The orange light is upstairs right now in the hallway," I said, "so don't give me that. It was outside my room while I was sleeping. Now what does it want, and what should I do about it?" "Just one or two would be enough," said the name. "How can a house not even have one window?" "Listen," I said. "I don't have to put up with you. I can turn you off and stick you back in the closet whenever I want. You won't see any light for months, maybe years." "All right," said the name. "I'll tell you. The orange light comes from the Utic." "Where's that?" "In the Black Forest. Now leave me alone." "If you don't tell me about the Black Forest," I said, "I'll put you in cement." "If you don't leave me alone," it said, "I'll set the Highland Orisk after you." The Highland Orisk is in the attic, I said. You already sent it after me, remember? I put a silver bell on the door so it can't come down.
I'll summon the Nicole.
The Nicole lives in water and torments only fishermen. You can't fool me. The Nain was quiet for a minute.
All right, then. The Turst.
What's that?
Why would I tell you? I'll just call on it and let it have its way.
I have to go to work now, I said. I unplugged the Nain and put it back in its box. Then I got my things and went out through the front door. When I got home from work, I checked in the upstairs hallway. The orange light was still there. I went down the hall to the bathroom and got a nasty shock. The orange light had spread while I was away. It was in the bathroom now, making all the faucets and mirrors look tarnished. The shower head, which is in the shape of a howling dog, looked almost black. When I thought about what to do, I wasn't sure. I went downstairs to the library to look for a book that might help. There were a lot of books, and whenever I had a problem, I would stand in front of the bookcase and close my eyes. I would think about what I wanted to know and then pick a book at random. The answer was almost always in the first book I picked, although sometimes I had to do it a second time. Standing in front of the bookcase, I felt a strange feeling like I was remembering something but remembering it wrong. The books had titles like Maps of the Ancient World and 1,000 Lifetimes in an Hour and Clockwork History and Quantum Spirituality and The Perfect Crime by Baudrillard. There was one called You Cannot Stop Us and one called An Illustrated Guide to Imaginary Places. On a lower shelf, I saw a title which seemed familiar. I took the book out and looked at it. It was bound like an old Hardy Boys mystery novel with the same blue background and the same kind of hand-painted cover. The painting was of a stone tower against a dark sky. It stood in the middle of a barren plain. Scraggly black plants grew from the cracked earth. The earth was the same color as the tower. Above the tower, the letters of the title, Where the Wolfbane Blooms, were the same color as the moon. Inside the book, I found pictures. They were old woodcuts and engravings. None of them were very nice. One was a man with a dog's head hiding behind a big rock on a hillside where 2 children were playing. The children had ribbons in their hair, and there was a village with a church steeple far away in the background. Another was a big black dog riding a man through the woods at night. The man's mouth and eyes were very wide. Another was a dog that was standing on its hind legs and speaking to a man on the steps of a Roman temple. Another was a dog on its hind legs opening a trap door in the floor of a cellar and beckoning 2 children to go in. I put the book back on the shelf and stared at it, thinking of a bookcase I had seen somewhere else. The bookcase I was thinking of was set into a wall with small colored tiles around its edges. It was low to the ground beneath a big window. Outside of the window was a flat plain the color of stone with small black plants growing out of it. The white cat came in the room and started making noise that it was hungry. I went to the kitchen and opened a can of tuna. The white cat followed me and rubbed against my legs while I scraped the tuna into a bowl. I put the bowl on the floor and went out into the hall. The gray cat was walking down the stairs towards me. Orange light was glimmering on its fur as it moved. I turned to see where the light was coming from and saw that it was coming out of the pantry by the basement stairs. In the study, I put the Nain back on the desk. It clacked and hummed when I turned on the generator. "What do I do about the orange light?" I said.
Feed it to the white cat.
Said the Nain. "Don't give me that," I said. "The orange light is spreading around the house. I need to know about the Udic and the Black Forest."
Better to ask about the Turst because it's coming for you.
"What's in the room below the basement?" I asked, ignoring.
What's outside the front door?
asked the Nain. "What's that supposed to mean?"
Oh, nothing. I'm sure you'll find out when you go to work tomorrow.
All right, that's all for now. Once again, you can find the audiobook at 1000lifetimes.com. Also, the ebook versions are coming soon, so keep an eye out. Thanks for listening.
And thank you for sharing, Jesse. And thank you, all of you, for returning after our little hiatus. I ask now that you be up and doing, that you stack your bowls and cups in the sink, wrap for the night and the homeward passage, and be off with you. The streets are doubtless near empty. Such walkers as you'll meet en route will most likely be attached to dogs of various sizes and flavors. But you might see the occasional solo pedestrian out there. And if you do, and if you find his or her face to be of a paler hue than is usual in a human, or even gray-looking in the shadows off the main stem out there, it's probably because it's winter. The temperatures hover in the single digits. And the sun this winter has been scarce. It's either that or the walker is a vampire, but most likely nothing worse. And when you dash home and jump into bed, pull the cats in after you, and have yourself some pleasant dreams.
This presentation has been brought to you by the District of Wonders Network, dedicated to podcasting the finest genre fiction. You can learn more about the District of Wonders and their many literary productions at their website, www.districtofwonders.com. Thank you for listening.